Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose at the Wharf. I'm Brad Grant, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Elizabeth, and we are truly delighted to be hosting Molly Jong-Fast, who is here to talk about her revealing and moving new book, How to Lose Your Mother, the Daughter's Memoir. Now, all of you remember the year 2023. Well, however it was for all of you, it was staggeringly awful for Molly. She struggled to move her mom, afflicted with dementia, and her stepdad, who had Parkinson's, into an assisted living facility, while her husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and underwent surgery and treatment. There were other very sad events too, that combined to make 2023 what Molly calls for her the worst year of her life. All of which prompted her to write this memoir, in which she looks back unsparingly and with raw emotion at her very difficult relationship with her very famous mother, Erica Jong. Erica, of course, shot to fame 52 years ago, the publication of her groundbreaking, sexually frank book, Fear of Flying, which became a landmark of feminist literature. 5 years later, Molly was born, but her mom remained absorbed by her own career, lovers, travel, alcohol. When her mom did pay attention, her affections were erratic. While Molly certainly has many benefits, a nanny, private schools, fancy hotel rooms, trips abroad, her childhood often felt lonely, at other times tumultuous, and led Molly later as a teenager into drugs and alcohol. Molly did grow up. She went into rehab at age 19, got married at age 25, had 3 children, and became accomplished in her own right. As I'm sure you all know, as a political writer, now at Vanity Fair, a political analyst on MSNBC, a podcaster, and the author of 3 previous books. Her new memoir, while mercilessly blunt and brutal about her mother, and filled with heartbreak, anger, and grief, is nonetheless quite eloquent in its honesty, self-awareness, and complexity. It also exhibits self-deprecating humor and a reservoir of love. Molly says she wrote the book to help others and also help herself, hoping the act of writing it would make her less insane, or at least less stuck. She sums up the relationship with her mother as wildly conflicted. The two are close, she says, but there's also an unbridgeable distance between them. Quite a paradox. Kirkus has praised Molly's book, calling it the best book Jong-Fast could have written about the worst year of her life. The Publishers Weekly said, resisting tidy sentiment or easy answers, Jong-Fast dives headfirst in the often difficult ambiguities of parent-child bonds. The results are stunning. The conversation with Molly will be one of journalism's most astute observers and gifted wordsmiths, New York Times columnist and feature writer Maureen Dowd. Maureen's also the author of 4 books, most recently the book Notorious, a collection of her wonderful profiles of stars from Hollywood, culture, fashion, and tech. One more thing about Maureen. If you've been paying attention recently to P&P's events, you'll have noticed that Maureen has moderated quite a few of them, including one just yesterday. Now that's because she knows many people and has many friends who keep asking her to moderate, and we're always excited when she does, because she really knows what to ask and how to guide a conversation, and if that's not a setup, Maureen, I don't know. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Molly Jong-Fast.
Okay, can you guys hear me? When Molly asked me to do this, I assumed it was a political book. So I was very relieved that it was a personal book, although I do have to say it's harrowing. And I also have to say, Molly, I was just blown away by your voice and your writing in this book. And, you're an amazing writer.
So I was like, who is my dream moderator? And I thought, well, in Washington, D.C., it's Maureen Dowd. I mean, and I thought, she's never going to do this. Like, there's no way. And I thought, well, just write to her and see what happens. And she said yes. And I was like, what, is this right? Like, I was like, maybe this was some other more, like I once followed someone on Instagram who I thought was Maureen Dowd, and her name was Maureen Dowd. And she messaged me and said, I'm really sorry, but I'm actually not the Maureen Dowd. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you said yes, I was like, oh my God, it is actually her. So I'm pretty thrilled.
That happened to me too. I invited Richard Benjamin, the actor, to a party, an inaugural party once, and another Richard Benjamin showed up. He was quite happy to be invited, though. I just wanted to start with something about me. One of the first stories I covered when I started as a journalist at the Washington Star was murder in Bethesda, Maryland. An attractive public relations executive. Her name was Marjorie Went. She had been murdered in her luxury high-rise, and the murderer was her 16-year-old daughter. She knifed her to death. And this girl was brilliant student at a top private school, beautiful. As I reported, I found there was tension between the mother and the daughter because the mother, obviously, wanted to be the daughter, and the daughter resented being the mother. The mother would get dressed up and go out with guys and get drunk and come back and expect her teenager to nurse her and listen to her romantic woes. And so because she was 16, Sherry Wentz spent a couple of years in juvenile detention and then was freed by the court to go to college in Annapolis. And I went to cover that, and I had very mixed feelings about it. I thought, wow, she's getting away with killing her mother. And about 6 months later, my editor called me with a follow-up story. Sherry had committed suicide in her dorm room. And she was depressed over the anniversary of her mother's death. And that story taught me that it's a dangerous place when the mother can't mother and the daughter has to mother. So Erica Jong and Molly Jong-Fast's relationship is not a violent tragedy, but an emotional one. As Molly writes of the time after she moved her mother into an assisted living home, the tragedy, now I could get her attention, but of course, now I didn't want it. Her book plays out in that very sad universe of a mother who doesn't know how to mother. And I had the most amazing mother in the world. All she ever thought about was whether we were warm enough and happy enough and safe enough. My mom took me to college with a butcher knife on the seat of the car in case we ran into trouble. As a parting gift, she gave me a Chinese letter opener with instructions on how to find the jugular. I've always felt sorry for people who didn't have great relationships with their mothers, because I know how that can screw you up. In the Times interview over the weekend, Molly said, I sold out Erica Jong, but it's sort of in honor of her. The main thing you write at the end of your book is that I survived being her daughter. As Nora Ephron said, everything is copy. She got criticized when Heartburn came out for painting Carl Bernstein as a cad because her sons would have to live with that. And Molly, you have been grappling with the big thorny question raised here. Does the fact that your mother wrote about you in her novels when you were growing up, taking away your privacy and never allowing you to feel in control of your identity, justify you writing about her with such radical candor in your memoir now that she is in a home with dementia?
Oh,
I finally got to I finally got to you.
yeah. No, it was good. I was like, she's so prepared too. I was like, this is so good. I was like, I get Maureen Dowd, and she also like has actually read the book and is interested. I'm very like thrilled. I'm sorry. Yes. So it's funny because when you said that thing about Carl and I'm very close with Jacob Bernstein. Our mothers were best friends when they were pregnant with us. And our birthdays are 2 days apart. And so we're constantly having these conversations about our parents and who had worse childhoods. And I always say that I had it worse because Nora was like actually quite a good mother. And also she was incredibly famous. And they had like celebrity, like the movie stars in their house all the time.
And she could cook.
Right. And she was a very good cook. And also Nick Pileggi, her husband, is like the most wonderful. He's really lovely. And there are two of them. I just think but he has a pretty good point about his childhood also being pretty complicated. But so in the question of, I feel, I think it's so interesting because I was on the way here and I was on the train and my aunt wrote to me because there's so much of my story that is reflected in my father's story with his father. Like my grandfather, like my mother at least really did love me and was very pleased that I existed.
And she didn't compete with you.
No, which is a big one. And my grandfather, Howard Fast, so really, really bad. So my aunt and I were texting, and my aunt, who now lives in Mexico, and she said, Grandpa was terrible to me too. And I said, I know, but I tried not to put you in the book because I was just dealing with main characters because I didn't want to hurt anyone who wasn't directly involved in the story. And you could tell she was like a little miffed. And I was like, we're trying here to, limit damage. But she was like, she said he was a terrible father to your father and he was even worse to me. And I thought like, okay, but I can't put it all in the book. But I do think like the thing that gave me great comfort was when I put my mom in the home and I write about this, I call my dad and my dad was like, when he died, I was like, I did it. I won. I survived. And it was so insane, but it was also like, I just was like, oh yeah. So, I mean,
some of her friends were mad at you, right? And they wanted to move back home, right?
Right. Well, there was a whole part of it was just like my godmother was mad at me. They weren't mad exactly. They were like, again, this was just a triage, right? Like I had to deal with them. He was in it. My stepfather was like in this sort of Parkinsonian dementia. So he kept having these terrible falls. And then because he was on, this is pretty boring, but he was on this blood thinner. So every time he fell, he had to go to the hospital. And then we didn't have anyone who could be with my husband at Sloan Kettering while my stepfather was at the, it just was like, it was just a manpower problem ultimately. And so it was, and I couldn't, but it was also, I said, this is secret that no one could, because I had come from this family where everyone wrote about me, but I knew that I was a little bit famous and I didn't want anyone to know because my husband is very private and sort of like a normal person and he had cancer. So I was like, Jesus. So I didn't want to tell anyone. So I told I have these 3 kids and they're pretty good kids. And so I said, you can't tell anyone, right? Nobody can know, right? Which is already so weird for me growing up as the daughter of Erica Jong. And I say, nobody can know. So my daughter comes to me like a month later. And this is like, I didn't write about it because I didn't want to put her in the book like this, but I feel like I can say it here. Just nobody tell anyone. And she said, can I tell my therapist that my dad has cancer? And I was like, whoa. So I didn't deal with it. It wasn't all like, when my daughter said, can I tell my therapist? I thought, ugh. So it wasn't perfect.
Well, you have such a specific, great voice in the book. Can you just read the beginning?
Yeah.
I have it marked out with pen.
Oh
And
my
then at
God,
the end.
yes, of course. Maureen Dowd is telling me I'm a great writer and that I should read something. Like, of course, no, okay. I am the only child of a once famous woman. How famous she was in her heyday, I would argue, is actually kind of irrelevant. George Conway, is that your phone? Oh, okay, all right, I'll take it. Fame like alcoholism rings a bell in you that can never be unrung. My mother was famous, and it changed the makeup of her cells, like a smoker who gets lung cancer, or an addict who gets so hooked on heroin that she is never free and has to go on methadone forever and ever, even after she's forgotten what the high of heroin was. Oh, no more? Okay. To say my mother and I are close doesn't really express the full magnitude of the relationship. We are painfully, inexorably close, chronically close, the way magnets are. Sometimes when I lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I'm not even sure I exist without her. She created me and I enabled her. But there is a paradox at the heart of our relationship. As close as we are, there has always been between us an unbridgeable distance. My relationship with her has always been wildly conflicted. I know that she loved me, but I also know that she never really seemed particularly interested in me. She always told me she wanted me, desperately wanted me, but I spent much of my school breaks in a trailer park in Tampa with my nanny. It was actually a very nice trailer park. It was really a mobile home. They were like high-end mobile homes. I mean, it
But
wasn't.
your mother left you
trailer-
for a year?
Well, she lived with Judy Licht in New York.
Yeah, she left her to go set up a bachelorette apartment in New York.
It was a fuck pad, was what they said. But sorry, bachelorette is that's a very genteel Washington D.C. way to say it. But these. I mean, it's funny because she really did live the lifestyle. She wrote that book, and I was watching this interview of her from 1974 when she was talking about how you could sit next to a beautiful man on the train and have sex with him and not know his name. And she actually did some of that stuff. Sorry.
But that's what is so fascinating. So she was this icon of feminism, but you write that she was always madly in love with men and shaping her life around men. Talk about that.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting. I mean, the thing that many points during my childhood, I thought, I'm the crazy one, right? Because everything people are telling me is not tracking with what I see, and one of the things, and again, I would say she was she's born in 1942. So I think we often forget how different it is to be a woman even now, right? You couldn't have a bank account. You couldn't, and my grandparents had been born in this country. They were bohemians. They had these very poor parents. They'd come to this country from the Ukraine and from Russia, and they were artists and writers, and my grandfather had ultimately sort of given up and decided to go straight and make some money, not a ton of money, but he was like an importer. And so the whole job of being an importer back then was just to go to Japan and get stuff and bring it back. So they just, their lives became these sort of strange lives. And my grandfather just wanted his daughters to become sort of these bourgeois members of society. He wanted them all to be academics, and then he sort of wanted them to get married. And I mean, it just was such a different, expectations for women. So I do think that even though she wrote this book, and she was quite, she was not an activist. Like, she was not like, she was, like, she was not Betty Friedan. And that was a real tension, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So your friend Susan Cheever, also the daughter of a once famous writer, told the Times recently, Molly's taking her life back. The book is an act of reclamation. Is that how you see it?
No. I mean, well, I don't want to disagree with Susan Cheever, and don't tell her, because she can be she's really great, but she can be tough. Ginny knows. And so I would say this was a story of, I mean, why I wanted to write this book was because I felt like there was a message here, which is you can get through anything. You can have the sort of year where everything you've ever worried about happens, and it can be okay. And there was such clarity there. And even for my husband, I mean, he got mad at me about a couple of things in the book, which I was surprised it was only a couple. And I was like, you signed on for this. Like, you marry into this family, it's, I remember when he got cancer, I was like, gonna have to write about this. I'm sorry. Like, I was like, I know this does not please you, but
That's what gives the book such an interesting tone, because part of it is like a Woody Allen movie. Your family, you're all in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, right? Yeah. And then part of it is just this cascade of sort of tragedies.
Yeah. And it's also like, I mean, there was this one time where we were at this funeral home because my stepfather, so part of the worst part was that his father, he had a powerful same-sex parent who had sort of occupied his brain the way that mine occupied mine. And actually, in some ways, it's a little better to have it just be Erica Jong, because it's like, she's so complicated and problematic, whereas his dad was so great and everyone loved him, and it was like, you're not allowed to have mixed feelings about like this wonderful patriarch. But he had to have more surgeries, even though he's fine now. And his sister had come up to stay in the hospital with him. And as she had come up to stay in the hospital, his 91-year-old father had decided to walk without the walker, and he had fallen, and he had broken his pelvis and ended up in the hospital, and then ended up in a coma. And it became this whole thing where my husband and his sister were like, didn't really believe in brain death, so they decided they were going to keep him on this respirator for 90 days. I mean, just this endless, and we sort of got involved in this weird discussion of like, what is death? Because I had my stepfather who had Parkinson's, and we got very involved in all the sort of nuances of when things go wrong.
So
pretty dark.
I interviewed Mike Nichols several years ago for his revival of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman on Broadway, and he told me he thought that the father-son relationship is the key relationship in literature and life. He said, when the mother says, I'm suffering because you don't love me enough, that's entirely different from the father saying, this is what you're going to do for a living. You're not going to go into the family rug cleaning business that I've spent my life building, or I'm going to have to spend the money I've saved up for you to learn how to be a writer or scenic designer or whatever the hell you want to do. The following or not following in the footsteps of the father is a tricky and anxiety-producing discussion between fathers and sons. And I'm curious, why do you think that there haven't been in literature more mother-daughter stories? Because obviously they're very rich territory. And you write a lot about the same-sex dynamic you discuss with your dad, who had a famous narcissistic father. You write, I know the damage a same-sex parent can inflict, often by accident.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason why there's less is because, I mean, it's funny because I think about the men that my mother was obsessed with. So part of why I don't feel bad about this book, and again, maybe this is my own justification, so go along with me, is because my mother always really what she cared about was her literary legacy. So she was like, you're going to be my executor. I don't want you to mess it up. Right? Like, you're a writer, so that's a good executor. She just was very, like, my grandfather also was upset. He said, he was like dying. He was 87. He was like, said, I really want a big obituary in the New York Times. I'm really worried that I'm going to get screwed by the New York Times. And I said, well, you're going to be dead, so that's good. You won't have to, no. And he said, they're all Trotskyites at the New York Times. And I said, Grandpa, they have not been Trotskyites at the New York Times. It was 2004. I said, no one has been a Trotskyite at the New York, no one has been a Trotskyite, period, in maybe 50 years. So, but the point is the literary legacy, I know where I was going with this. So my mom, the men, when my mom was sort of trying to hang on to her career, there were these men who, I'm thinking about like Tom Wolfe, but I'm thinking about people like Norman Mailer, people who, like these men who are really almost lost to history. I mean, John Updike is a great example. These men, Philip Roth, who would be on the bestseller list, who would be, just dominate the zeitgeist, who are now really, sort of, and so she was very interested in her legacy in the way, she would want the Joan Didion sunglasses legacy,
But what do you think the legacy for feminism is of the zipless fuck? Because I don't feel young women are as into that kind of thing. They seem more into like Blue Apron or, cooking meals at home than casual sex.
Yeah, I think, look, I have my own view because I'm a little bit more interested in politics than my mom was in some ways. So I think that the sort of original sin of second wave feminism was not codifying the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. Like, I think that was the moment that everybody got off track. Like, had they done that, that would have protected Roe, that would have set in motion things that would have changed sort of the way things turned out. My mom was like not an activist, so it was she wasn't, she was much more interested in, because she had dropped out of her dissertation program at Columbia. She was much more interested in sort of the history of the pastoral novel than in like the activism that could have really been, had I been her, I would, and I'm glad I'm not, and this is in no way, she really made a mess of it. But I mean that with all the love in the world. But if I were in a position where I had been sort of put into the spotlight like that, I would have focused more on the activism because she had an opportunity to do amazing things.
But she didn't hang out with like Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan.
She was friendly with Betty Friedan. She was friendly with Andrea Dworkin. I feel like she didn't quite get them, right? Because she was so in her kind of bourgeois Upper East Side thing.
Well, Gloria Steinem always said, what is it, a woman
without a man is a fish like without a bicycle.
Yeah, and so that's the opposite of your mom's philosophy. Right?
Oh, and none of them really liked her. Like Gloria, they didn't like her. I think that towards the end, Andrea Dworkin did actually like her, but Andrea Dworkin was, like, it was just such a weird, like my mom really was, she liked jewelry, she married a divorce lawyer, she was very bourgeois, whereas Andrea Dworkin was like, she was, wearing those overalls, and she was pretty tough, like she really did, it was not an act, like that was who she was.
You are so honest and at times self-flagellating in the book, doubting your own merits as a daughter and a person. How tough is it to expose yourself this way, and what gave you the confidence to do so?
You know, this is actually the great thing about my mom, and this she gets full credit for, which was she was from that writerly tradition of you, if you're going to do it, you better do it, right? Like you have to leave it all on the field. You know, she would always say, I can't remember who the quote is, but, you know, there was some sort of pretty good writer of the 19th century who said, it sounds trashy, but they actually wrote really well, who said, you know, you have to sit down at the typewriter and open a vein. So I came from that literary tradition. And then remember, I've been sober since I was 19. So my feeling was always like, if we're going to do this, like, it's fine to leave stuff out, right? Like I didn't put my daughter's therapy story in there because I just thought, I'm not going to do that. But though now I'm telling it, so maybe that's the same thing. But I really did feel like you just have to go in there and do it all. And if people hate it, I did think, you know, because of the politics, because I do mostly write about politics, and because what American politics right now is like kind of like a blood sport, I did feel a little anxious because I was like, you know, I have had people in that world go after me in crazy ways. And I thought, like, there's a world in which they just use, you know, somebody reads it and finds all this stuff that's terrible and takes it out of context. But then I thought, you know, at least they'll have read it.
So your mother told the Times this week that she does ultimately plan to read the book, and she said it was great. She wants you to tell everything, and she has no problem with you writing everything. But you didn't give her a copy.
I actually did give her a copy. But you know what the thing is? I mean, this is like the moral quandary, right? I said to her, I said to Alex, I said, you can do anything you want. You can talk to anyone. I said, I think you should talk to the team Erica Jong people, the people who are her people, who completely are on her side and who get mad at me, and not to her, because she does have, you know, she sits with this guy, Johnny, and they watch television together. I mean, this is like, she's not, you know, but then I felt like maybe I shouldn't keep her from, and I thought, my mom will have, all I really cared about was her being upset. And I thought, my mom will have such a good time talking to this reporter. Like, it'll be really fun for her. And so let's let her do it. And I talked to Johnny afterwards, and Johnny was like, she had the best time with the interview. So I was like, you know, I mean, I thought, like, why not? She really likes, like my grandfather too, like he'd have all these documentary film crews come from these countries. I was like, these documentaries are never getting made. You know, like a Swiss filmmaker coming to make a documentary on the great Howard Fast. And I thought, you know, this is really, really, you know, fun for them. So let's let them do it.
No, her quotes were totally, she was like, yeah, when you write about yourself, you've got to write it all.
Yeah.
But you said you didn't read your mother's books, that you needed to protect yourself because she had you as a character in a lot of the novels.
Yeah, but my husband read some of them and was like, can you, so for Fear of Flying, I read 200 pages. We were in Heidelberg on a train, and I thought, oh my God, all of this really happened. And some of this happened with your father. And I thought, no, that's it. And I put it away, and I was like, we're done. I was like, it's over. But with my, yeah, I mean, I've been pretty careful, but my husband has not. And so he was like, read Fear of Dying. There were a couple of books sort of towards the end and articles where it started to become clear that she really was going to just ruin all our lives. And one was Fear of Dying. And my husband was like, I am an anti-Semitic stereotype. How am I an anti-Semitic stereotype? She's Jewish. And I said, I don't know. So he would sort of highlight passages and read them to me.
Tell about your fear when she would give a toast.
No, that was, so this is actually a pretty good. So my husband, when we first met, I said, you know, there's this bad thing my mom does. And he said, she's Erica Jong. How bad can it be? She's so famous, right? Because, you know, he had these like intellectual Jewish parents for whom Erica Jong was like pretty impressive. And I said, no, it's really bad. And he said, oh, you're being over it. So we go to my cousin's wedding, and she gets really drunk. First of all, I didn't even know that you were supposed to be asked to give toasts. I just assumed that you just gave toasts wherever you went. Like, I mean, I as I got older, I realized like this was not normal. And she got really drunk, and I thought, oh, she's gonna give it. And she got up there, and she had this very fraught relationship with my two aunts because she had written about them endlessly, and they were both really mad at her. And the younger one looked just like her. So the younger one would get on the Madison Avenue bus, and someone would go, Erica Jong, and she'd be like, no, not pleased. And so this was her son. And so my mom gets really drunk, and she gets up there, and she says, we never thought he would marry her. And I was like, you don't even bear, and he said, she starts going in, they broke up, maybe he was sleeping with other, and I was like, and at every point I thought like, oh my God, this is so, and I looked over at my husband, and he was like, yeah, okay. So.
Got it. So I have been fascinated with narcissism for a long time. I had this narcissistic boss once, and I ordered a lot of books on narcissistic bosses and read them all. And I had them all on my office coffee table one day, and my boss walked in and looked at them, and he goes, oh, do you know someone who's narcissistic? I said, yeah, I do. So you talk about the alternative universes your mother and stepfather created, and you said your mother was constitutionally incapable of being honest. You write about the virus of fame with your mother, and about how she lived in a strange post-truth ecosystem, which sounds familiar. How did growing up with these high doses of dishonesty and narcissism prepare you for covering Donald Trump?
That's a good question. That is a good question. Well, and also growing up in New York in the 80s. So, I mean, Donald Trump is the same product as, they're products of the same system, right? She knew a lot of those people, though she thought Donald Trump was very tacky. But they knew Roy Cohn, and they went to the same, I don't think they didn't like Roy Cohn because he was a Republican, but, and they all went to Studio 54. I mean, it was a similar mentality. I mean, it's like the Kurt Anderson question, right? Kurt Anderson always feels that he's somehow responsible for Trump because of the little checks. At Spy Magazine, they wrote these checks to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump kept cashing them.
What did they get down to, like 33 cents
or
something, and he cashed it?
Yeah. The question is, like, what is responsible for? I thought I was nuts. I got sober when I was 19, and until then, I basically thought for so much of my life, I'd be like, this is not right. Like, there's something off here. And I'd be like, no, everyone else says it's fine, so it must be me. And what was interesting about covering Trump, when Trump started, I thought, oh no, I had those same kind of thoughts, right? Like, this is crazy, everyone else is crazy. No, I'm crazy, and everyone else is, that kind of like through the looking glass. And I definitely felt, so I think it did help. I also think, that sort of megalomaniacal New York obsession with self, and that I understood it, if that makes sense.
So you write that your mother got a lot of leeway because she was famous. You write, but such allowances are a favor to no one, least of all to the narcissist. Being able to get away with everything made her, in fact, very boring. I am reminded of this when I watch the way people like Elon Musk exist in the world. You need someone in your life who can tell you when you're full of shit.
I think this is the best thing I've ever learned. So you absolutely have to have someone who tells you that dress makes you look fat. You have to have someone who says, no, think about Elon Musk for a minute. He thought, I'm the richest man in the world. I'm going to go into the federal government and cut all of this aid for poor children in Africa, and everyone's going to love me for it. And no one sat down with him and said, all these rich people throughout history have given money to poor people, and not taken it away, maybe they were onto something. And no one ever paused, he just said, no, this is gonna work out great. And I feel like that's a pretty good example of why you wanna have people who tell you you can't wear that dress, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Elon needs someone to tell him that. Yeah. So, true.
George.
He would never listen. So after an early career writing the sort of novels that are sometimes classified as chick lit, how did you get into the political conversation? I mean, one day I looked around and she was like the most famous political commentator.
Thank you. That's pretty cool to have Maureen Dowd say it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say it, but it is still cool. So basically what happened to me was I wrote a couple novels, then I had all these children, and I was like, wow. I never, I was like an only child. I never thought I would have all these kids. And then at some point I thought I have to do something. I mean, I'm like, who am I? And I started writing these little political columns, and I went back to I went back and started writing for the Forward, the Jewish Daily Forward, where I had written when I was 13. And I started writing I wrote 2 columns a week for about a year and a half. And the first couple were really bad. They got better, but I just I sort of really learned how to do it. And then I went somewhere a little bit better, called me, and then somewhere a little bit better. And I just kept working. And I think I became I got edited by a guy called Mike Tomasky when I was at the Daily Beast. And he sort of taught me how to write these columns. And it was so freeing not to have to write about myself. I really thought I was supposed to write about it was such a great example of how no one had ever told me I could be a doctor. I thought you had to write these autobiographical novels until you died. I really did. I didn't realize you could do other stuff. And when I started doing this, I was like, this is so much better and much more interesting. And so I just got better and better at it. And I mean, I think any sort of success I've had with this has been just chopping wood and carrying water and being able to learn.
I think the truest thing that Trump has said is that the liberal media benefits from him being in office, even as they tear him apart. He is a showman with an unparalleled ability to create a cascade of what we used to call front page stories. Reporters get lucrative TV contracts, book contracts. You wouldn't get those covering Tim Walz in the White House. Some Democrats confess that Trump derangement syndrome is real. Can truth-telling about a wannabe dictator lead to rote thinking or unquestioning contempt?
So here's what I would say. By the way, first of all, Tim Walz is a big texter. And he texted me on the way here, and he said, I would like a signed book. And I said, well, I will send you a signed book. And he said, I will Venmo you. And I said, you're the fucking excuse my French, governor of Minnesota. I'll just send you the book. So I plan not to Venmo him. But I thought that was pretty good.
Don't tell him what I said. In fact, this whole thing is off the record.
Off the record. That's right. Don't quote us. But no, I just want to, because we were talking about this, but George Conway and I were talking about this before, just to name drop. And he's here right now. And we were talking about, and I actually believe, and this is going to sound, I think people are going to get mad at me, but I don't care, is that what Trump has done has, I think, hopefully will have opened the door to a real soul searching about what our politicians should be for us on both the left and the right. And there's a real question, and this is something we talk a lot about, Democrats ran in 2024 and they said democracy was on the ballot. And we actually really believe that. I certainly believe that. And so now if they are going to govern, and I think this is why the base is so furious with them, they need to govern like democracy is on the ballot. And that means that, I'm going to get really in trouble for this, but I have a friend who's a ranking on one of these committees, a Democrat in Congress. And I said, you have this opportunity on oversight to elevate AOC, who can connect with voters by the fact that she has millions of people who listen to everything she does. I said, she can narrate. You don't have a mainstream media that you used to. So you have a woman who can really narrate. And he said, yeah, but Jerry Connolly has been really good to me. And I thought, what? I get so furious. And that was, and until Democrats stop acting like that, we're all in a lot of trouble.
So we're going to open it up to questions,
Sorry.
but I have one more question. And George Conway, I want you to cover your ears. Cover your ears for a minute. So what is with the feud with Kellyanne Conway? She called you Molly Jong slow.
Yes.
You call her.
It was very clever. No one's ever called me that before.
You call her the sunken-eyed mistress of alternative facts.
Yes, that was good.
What happened?
She doesn't look as sunken anymore. Don't quote me. No, what happened was she doesn't like women who are friends with her husband. Actually, she told can I tell this story? Okay, so my husband, okay. My husband finds this, I think the important part here is my husband finds this to be hilarious. But Kellyanne told everyone that George and I were having an affair. Like all these journalists in DC. And
Is that an alternative fact?
Well, my husband was like, ha ha. And I was like, you should be worried. You shouldn't find this hilarious. And he was like, and actually my husband was on a trip and he saw George and they had breakfast together and they sent me a picture, he thought it was very funny, but I thought it was very obnoxious of her to do that. And in fact, a lot of DC journalists came over to me. I thought it was obnoxious because, I am married for a long time and I have all these children. And so this journalist came over to me and said, so you're with George now. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, who told you that? And also so casually, I was like, whoa, all right. So I thought it was very bad form, but I think that's sort of the whole story. I don't think is there more to this story, George Conway? Oh, there happens to be a microphone right here.
I'll pass.
So, she is mean to other women, but I felt uniquely able to push back against her because I just felt like my husband knows I'm not having an affair with George Conway. He thinks it's hilarious, so she's not going to bully me. If she wants to bully someone, she can bully the 8 other women journalists she's being mean to.
All right. So do you guys have some questions?
Yeah, but only on Kellyanne Conway. Yeah.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand and I'll come to you.
Well, I've got this one here.
Thank you. This is an amazing evening, and I know we all feel this way. But for Molly, obviously, your mother's talent of writing was passed along to you, and it was fiction, and it was writing in a traditional sense. But you have discovered this other talent, obviously, in this new form, which is a very long form interviewing on podcasts.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Right? No, real.
to.
I mean, it's a bit addictive for some. I mean, some people have it and some people don't. You obviously do. And I wonder, have you ever thought about? Could you imagine your mother in that format trying, and what would that have looked like? And I mean, I'm that serious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of funny to think about, but I'm also serious to know if that same talent would have.
Well,
applied.
I mean, I think I got that from being able to sort of interface with her. I mean, you have to remember, she she was a brilliant academic who went to Barnard and was she was, I don't know, Phi Beta Kappa or and she then went and did like you, because you just did a PhD. I was actually thinking about you doing a PhD.
Masters, I did.
So she did a master's, and then she dropped out of her PhD program, maybe because she was being sexually harassed by one of her professors, though she tells the story as like jubilant, whatever. But I actually was like listening to it thinking like, that's kind of sexual harassment, right? But that was not a sort of available terminology then. So she was very academic and intellectual. I think that had she not been so alcoholic and narcissistic, she might have been able to do it. But, my whole thing, the reason why I think I'm good at that, if I am good at that, is because my game is I try to get people to talk as much as possible. And so my whole thing is I just want to make you comfortable so you can talk. And then if you say too much, that's great. And then nobody's going to ever complain about that. And then if you're really boring and you speak in McKinsey speak, I will get mad at you, which happened the other day with a Democratic politician. And I said, I want you to be governor as much as you want to be governor, but if you can't speak like a person, how are people going to listen to you?
It's so hilarious that what was it the other day? They put out the list of words, that they have to kind of come up with words.
To appeal to men, speak English sentences. Just talk to people like they're people. Like that's, I interviewed this guy who's running, the New York City politics is the worst thing in the world. And the only good part is that nobody cares. So you never have to cover it.
That's good since we're missing the mayoral debate tonight.
Oh, nobody cares. So in the comptroller race, there is, in the mayoral, I can't even think of it. It's so terrible. But in the comptroller race, there is this guy who's like was a rock musician, and he's winning for whatever reason. Right now he's winning. I mean, the comptroller or whatever. But he came on and he was like talking like a person, and I said, "Why do you talk like you haven't been trained in McKinsey?" And I mean, that is
why is that so hard for Democrats?
So I have a theory that's really convoluted, but basically is Obama was incredible and a once-in-a-lifetime orator. But he spoke in a way that was his superpower was that he could speak and not say anything. But because he was so brilliant, it didn't matter, right? You'd be like, yes. But I think a lot of Democrats took the wrong message from that and were like, yes, I can speak. And so we end up with Veep, right? America. And you have the Amera and the Ka. And you're like, but none of that means anything.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Trump speaks to his fans the way he would speak to his best friend or his wife if she were listening.
Yeah.
Or, and that gives him enormous power because people feel that they're really hearing what he's thinking before he even does it. It's so intimate. Obama would never do anything like that.
But he also does two things that somehow Democratic politicians have decided they can't do. He offers people stuff, like anything they want, and he doesn't care if he can do it or not. So no tax on tips? You want no tax? Oh, I'm in Nevada. No tax on tips. And by the way, this BBB has no tax on tips. Nobody. No, like how are they going to do that? What's going to be a tip? Everything can be a tip. I may be paid for my next book in tips. Why not?
So who do you think is going to be the big Democratic star in the next few years?
Well, so I have this fantasy, which I just pitched to my dinner companions earlier, and I don't think they liked it. Did you guys think I was smart or stupid? All right, I'm definitely doing. All right, so I had a theory. The question is, in 2022, will there be a Democratic Tea Party? Right? Will there be very angry constituents who run? Will it be 100 AOCs? I mean, I hope so. Sorry. All right.
Linda.
Hi. I have a question about your mom's dementia. Because you lose the person
Yeah.
when they go into dementia, and then whatever it was that you wanted to say, you can't say anymore because that person isn't there anymore. So do you feel like you've said everything you want to say and cleared the air with your mom? And is it too late now in her dementia cycle for you to do that if you want to?
So I never could have, like, I would always say, like, I'm mad at you for this. And she'd be like, I'm the worst mother. I was terrible. So she was never a person who could, like, take that kind of criticism. But I also always sort of felt like it was a pointless exercise anyway. And so much of our relationships, I mean, this is not always true. But for me, I just felt like I kind of had to deal with it and deal with my feelings about her. And the reality was she did amazing things for me. Like, I would not exist were it not for her staunch belief that I was a genius, despite the fact that I was wildly dyslexic and counseled out of third grade, you know? So like that, I'm not sure that if I had a kid who was wildly dyslexic and counseled out of third grade, I'd be like, this kid is a genius. I mean, I have a lot of kids.
I don't understand how Dalton could kick you out for dyslexia. That seems illegal
I
and
was
immoral.
It, it was the 80s. It was very, worse things have happened to better people was what but Jacob stayed at Dalton Jacob Bernstein stayed at Dalton the whole way through. And
Yeah, he came out at Dalton, right?
Yes. No, he's very cool. And we did have a discussion about who the best Nepo baby is. Like, who wins? Who's the one that's like the good one? And it's Tracy Allen Ross. Because
So how do you feel about being a Nepo baby?
I feel good. I mean,
Do you think that's an insult or a compliment?
I told my kids, I was like, you guys really need everyone not to be a writer, okay? I just, all I need from you is not to be writers. You can be whatever you want, but not that, okay? And so I have a writer. And she was like really upset, and she was saying, I'm really sorry. I really thought I could be like a lawyer, but I really think this is what and I thought, like, she's apologizing to me for what she wants. So I think that when you see your parents do it, I mean, I think it's two things. I think my brain I think from being dyslexic, my brain is a little wonky. But then I also think that you sort of see that and your brain sort of, it's hard to shake.
We have time for a couple more. Susan Bennett, I know you have a question.
Yes. Hi, Susan Bennett. Have a question.
Susan works with Bill Maher, so I know she has a question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, Molly, did you think about doing the book, not to be mean, but after
she dies?
She passed?
So,
I mean, because that
Yeah.
seems like I had a
You
tortured...
are, she's like brutally, she uses, somebody made up that phrase, brutal candor. And you do question yourself whether you waited until she had dementia for cover to say what you wanted to say.
But did you, part of the Erica Jong legacy involves Taffy Ackner. So Taffy is like a big Erica Jong person, and she wrote the Fear of Flying movie, which is now sort of in the process of maybe, I'm not going to say more, but so we had lots of conversations about but I kind of thought of this book as sort of not, I mean, it's sort of branded. I was actually thinking about this. I was thinking I shouldn't say this, so I'll definitely say it. It's branded as a daughter's memoir, but I don't really think of it as that. Like, I really think of it as what I wanted it to be was a year of magical thinking. Like, because for me, what it was about was not my mother, was more about, like, what does it mean to sort of what does it mean to say, to sort of that, for that relationship to end? Like a lot of people who are taking care of someone with dementia or have a parent with dementia know that what happens, or a spouse, what happens is you start mourning right away because it's over, right? You start to see like that person is slipping away, and so I didn't feel like it was sort of, I didn't feel like it was true to the spirit of this thing to wait, until, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I went through a similar thing as Molly with going with my brother to Sloan Kettering and being told that cancer was going to kill him and he should get his papers in order. And then somehow the geniuses at Sloan Kettering pulled him through. But I'm amazed you were raising kids and dealing with your mother and stepfather and going through that at Sloan Kettering. Because when you are dealing with one of these intense cancer things at Sloan Kettering, it's like you're in another world, and you had all that other stuff too.
And I would go to Morning Joe. I would go from Sloan Kettering.
You were going on Morning Joe.
And I would like be crying in the car. I'd be like, I'm going to make it. I don't know, I found work to be really, for whatever reason, I felt like work made me feel like I was normal. And then I just would go to bed at 8:30. I would have ice cream. I would do a sort of Joe Biden-ish thing. I would have ice cream, and then I would go to bed. And if you have 8 hours of sleep, no matter how bad things are, you feel pretty good,
Yeah, I remember kneeling in the waiting room there and writing a column, but it is really a daunting thing, and I don't know how you were able to do a podcast
but
and
it's
go on Morning Joe.
But it's so fancy. The other thing was like, New York Hospital is so depressing and it's really dirty, and I'm in this emergency room and it's so bleak. And then you go to Sloan Kettering and it's like, this is the Stavros Niarchos cancer wing, and it's filled with Knoll furniture, and you're like, this, and they're like, do you want to, we have all these different products, and I thought, it's pretty nice, So I liked going to Sloan Kettering a lot. I'm sorry. That says more about me than.
We have our last question over here.
Oh, can we do two more? Because there's one here too.
Thank you. First of all, just thanks to Molly and Maureen for having such an engaging conversation in front of us. Second, I know that Molly, you said you had to put your mother's work away and not really engage with it, but you'd read 200 pages of Fear of Flying, and then your husband had read you sections of the other work. And I'm wondering, what do you think the difference is between how your mother created herself as a narrator in those books and how you experienced her?
The problem, I think the big problem was to have Fear of Flying in 1973. It was just too much. It wasn't too much because it was amazing for her and she sold millions of copies, but she became sort of a mimeograph of that. And I think had she had the opportunity to change and grow, it's like going to graduate school. She just wasn't able to sort of change and grow in a way that kept her interested. And in some ways, I think it was that she also lost interest in the story in a certain way. But I also think she felt, somebody pretty smart wrote this about her, that she became so involved in the publicity of the books that she kind of lost the sort of narrative arc of her story, which is something, that's again the idea, you don't want to be famous for being famous. You want to just sort of stay on track for what you're doing and be interesting and intellectual and learn things and bully Democratic politicians into doing the right thing, which, by the way, is my hobby now. And they won't even, they'll try to, work me. They'll say, oh, we're doing this. And I'll say, what I was really I do this, Jewish mother thing. You know what I was really disappointed by?
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much to Politics and Prose for having this, and to both of you for this very inspiring and engaging and insightful conversation. It's so incredible to hear from sort of the stars in the sky who are also going through these things that are so common, especially even more common as the whole country gets older. And my question really is a little bit of a practical and a human one to both of you. On the first hand, do you have any apps or other tools that helped you to navigate either the process of caring for a relative with a disability, including an older parent, or managing your own chronic illness? Perhaps you heard about any tool that worked. And I don't expect you to necessarily have heard of one, but I'm just asking. And then the second thing, which I'm sure you have, is in terms of these podcasts, there are so many now about grief, about reclaiming, about dealing with the times and what feminism means now and what we need to reimagine America now. And I know there's so many, but if either of you could highlight one or two of the podcasts that you think we should be paying attention to, I would be grateful.
I'm really curious what podcasts you listen to.
Gosh, that's a good question.
And you don't have, I mean, reading is obviously still better, but I just am curious. There's no reason why you need to.
Yeah, no, I think podcasts are something I'm going to get to.
Well, no, and honestly, I still think reading is better. Now, that said, here's what I listen to. Because I'm a podcaster, so that's why I have to. I don't listen to anyone who I'm directly competitive with, or in my head, anyway. And when my husband listens to, there's one podcast where I want to kill him. And I'm like, you have to put on headphones if you're going to listen to those guys. I'm not going to say who it is. But
say who it is.
Well, I just am I get a little jealous about that if he's going to listen to the Pod Bros. Like, I don't think that's really fair. Like you should listen to your wife's podcast. You don't, it's like.
Why can't you be the Democratic Joe Rogan?
I would like to be the Democratic Joe. I need to have like about 69 million more listeners. That's where I need to, that will be the first thing. And
That's
also
easy.
I need to work out and get into supplements. So I like, here are the podcasts I listen to. And they're really nerdy. Punchbowl and Playbook, because it's just very, I don't expect anyone to listen to those, but that's what I listen to. And then I listen to a wonderful podcast that I love and that I am like the champion of. And it's called 5 to 4, How the Supreme Court Sucks. And those guys are really smart lawyers and it's really nerdy stuff. You would hate it, George Conway, because it's too lefty for you. But it's very nerdy, lefty. And with the Supreme Court, I feel like it's just hard for me to absorb the information because it's so complicated. So I try to listen to a lot of legal podcasts because I feel like it just is something I should know more about. So
you don't listen to any wellness. Didn't you ask about wellness?
No.
Grief. Anderson Cooper, has that grief.
I think the thing that I do that I think is really smart, if you want to hear the one thing I do I think is smart, is that I ask people what to do all the time. So like when Matt got when they found this mass, I knew I had a friend who was, I sort of went to people and was like, who do I go to? What do I do? And being open to ask questions, I think a lot of people don't necessarily do that. And that was very helpful for me. I know that's pretty lame, but it's where we are.
The only wellness app I have is I have that Calm app because you can get Cillian Murphy to take you on a train ride through Ireland while you go to sleep. And that gives you a lot of nice fantasies as you go to sleep. So, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Molly and Maureen.